All right, let's get into it. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us for this Change Nerd episode. Speaking to Anil Saxena. He's an executive consultant. He's a speaker. He's also a coach. And today we're going to talk about how HR can deliver business value. So Anil, thank you so much for being available today.
You're welcome, Brian.
Awesome.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So let's start it off. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I guess the best way to describe myself is I'm a recovering engineer that kind of fell into this world of organizational change. So I got my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering 100 years ago, and have been working with organizations, helping them through big organizational changes due to merger, acquisitions, changes to government regulations, dips in performance, and sort of everything in between. And my focus, my sweet spot, is really on the people side of change. So how do we enable people, teams, and organizations to really thrive during and once change is implemented?
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Let's talk about HR. There's a lot of conversations happening about HR right now, a lot of content being pushed out, but what are some of the challenges that HR specifically is, what are they dealing with?
Well, I think that there's three really big buckets of challenges that HR organizations are facing right now. I think one of the first ones is, what is the role of HR in this changing world that we live in? And can employees trust HR? And if they can, why? So I think that's one big challenge. I think the second big challenge is that as technology is really coming into place in organizations, HR really needs to find its sweet spot, because what technology experts say is that people are the most important part of any big technology change. And so what's HR's role in that? And I think the third big area of challenge is sort of this ongoing challenge that HR has always faced is, what is the value that HR brings to the organization, not just in terms of how to keep attrition low or how to reduce the cost of hire, but how does it actually add value to the bottom line of the organization, whether that is for profit, right, money, or reaching goals, if that's not the thrust of the organization.
No, that's actually a really good way of describing some of the challenges. And you spoke a little bit, but can you tell us a little bit more, like, from your perspective, how would you define value?
Yeah, that's a great question. And because value could be a number of different things, right? It's not just money on the P&L, right? I think as we kind of look at what is business value, it's, is it increasing the number of customers, or increasing the retention of customers, or maybe it's market growth, maybe it's growth in a particular sector, maybe it's lower error rates, or the impact on the community that they're working in or working with, or maybe it's lower churn. So I think when I say business value, I'm really thinking about real bottom line sorts of things that business leaders, that organizational leaders are really interested in seeing, right? Seeing those metrics that they get rated on, and HR really ensuring that the work that they're doing has positive impact on that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's so fair. So how, if you were to advise an HR leadership team like right now, what type of framework or what sequence of steps would you recommend to them to help them get to that particular point?
So I think there's probably, and I like to think in threes, right? It's my simple mind. I think the first thing that I would do is identify what are the core business objectives or the core organizational objectives, and what are the initiatives that HR is working on that align directly to those initiatives. And so doing a little bit of detective work to figure out what are the things that they're doing to drive those organizational objectives. I think the second big thing would be to take a look at when they roll out new programs or initiatives, what is the impact to the organization, both the short-term impact and the long-term impact? And how do you create a long tail with regards to that kind of impact? And then I think the third big thing that HR organizations need to be taking a look at is, what are the skills that they're going to need to really ensure that they're relevant and successful for the future? And I've identified a handful based on interviews and research that I've done. I'll give you a couple.
Yeah.
So one is really being a data whisperer.
Data.
So right, there's tons of data out there, right? And we have to make sure that we're leveraging that data in a positive way. And it's not necessarily being a quant or understanding how to do different magic with numbers.
Yeah.
It's actually really being able to ask the right questions around that data. And I think the second skill I'll share with you is being a change agent, right? And not necessarily change from the aspect of being an expert in ProSci or an ADCAR expert, which I think is important. But it is, how do you enable the organization to be change ready, right? So there is so much change that's coming at us from every different direction.
Yeah.
And what it affects most is people. And so how can we in HR really enable our organization to be proactive around change and see the change that's coming around the corner?
Yeah, that is that's very, very, it's an interesting perspective, and something that that's not talked about enough. Can you tell us more about HR and change, and your perspective on the role that HR can potentially play at a more like tactical level?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different things that I've noticed, right? That oftentimes in big organizational change, the HR is going to need to be ready to take on whatever occurs after the change is over. And so they need to be those long-term caretakers. And so we need in the world of change management, right, as change management practitioners,
Yeah.
we need to make sure that we're working in parallel with HR so that when we're done, we can hand that over in a way that is successful so that the change really sticks.
Yeah.
I think the other part of it is that there is often a lot of training that's necessary during a big change, whether that's a new system or a new process or a new way of being. And so we need to make sure that that training is really done in a way that is sustainable, so that it's not just everybody gets trained for the big bang when the thing gets implemented, but how does that training get morphed, and what are tools that we can really help to create to enable that training to be successful. And I think that the third thing is that we're arming HR with the knowledge, skills, and ability to be able to ensure that it's a part of the organization for the long haul. So oftentimes changes in organizations require behavior changes. They require procedural changes. And so we have to make sure that the kind of people processes in HR are ready for that. So are we promoting people? Are we doing performance management? Are we creating succession plans that have those behaviors sort of encapsulated in that?
Yeah. I love that. Something that I oftentimes see when I'm working with different organizations or even speaking with different organizations is that a lot of their HR processes are just kind of standard. They're not really custom to the business.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if you have, you have goals, annual goals, and they have mid-years. But if you look at the performance management system, it doesn't really incentivize people to work in the right way to demonstrate the right behaviors that's going to like drive the bottom line. So that's very, very interesting. Let's talk about culture a little bit, because I know culture is such a broad topic and everything. But oftentimes HR is somewhat of the owner of that. As we see more, as we see, increased technology hit organizations, as we see, career paths take different angles, right? Because and companies starting to take on more freelancers and contractors and not as many FTEs as much. What can HR do to start managing a culture, managing their particular culture in the organization?
Yeah, so culture is an interesting thing, right? Because there are aspects of culture that we see, right? Like the behaviors and the way that people act towards each other. And then there's sort of things that we don't see, but that are always there, right? How do we make decisions? What things are allowed? Who gets promoted? What's acceptable behavior? What's not, right? So there's
Yeah.
all those kinds of things. And I think HR has the scope of really taking the processes that they have in place, and those are really the sort of tools or the levers that drive culture. So when you think about most cultures have some behaviors that they want to see, right?
Yeah.
They want to see people acting in a particular way. And so what HR can do is really ensure that those people processes, talent management, performance management, learning and development, onboarding, uh, succession plans, all of those things, that the outcomes of those are reflections of the behaviors that they want to see manifested. So that's the positive side, right?
Yeah.
So you want leaders that when they are promoted and they're leading a bigger part of the organization, that they're actually acting, they're expressing those behaviors, they're rewarding those behaviors.
Yeah.
I think on the flip side of that, we also want to make sure that when people don't express those behaviors or they do things that are sort of counterculture,
Yeah.
that we call that out. And not necessarily fire people, right? That's not necessarily what I'm promoting, but that we let them know that, hey, that's not how we operate here. Here's how we operate.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, right? I mean, I know you have kids. I have an adult daughter, and it's a little bit like a family, right?
It is. Yeah.
You don't want the members of your family to act in a way that is going to produce the kind of results that are going to be counter to the way you want things done.
Yeah.
And it's similar in an organization, but just at a broader scale.
Yeah. I love that.
And I think it's an important role that HR plays. But all too often, we don't really ensure that those behaviors are really being adhered to. And I think that that's what causes the disconnect, right? Like we
Yeah.
have those stated behaviors on the wall,
Yeah.
but Joe over here is acting not so well.
Yeah, yeah, and we don't have the right controls in place. To your point,
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
love that. So the last thing I want to talk to you about is engagement. Um, in doing employee engagement surveys, it's almost become an annual, somewhat of a quarterly exercise.
yeah,
And it's my perspective that I believe that a lot of organizations are not really measuring leading indicators. So if you look at it, if you ask an employee group to take an engagement survey, by the time you get the results, whether they're good or bad, it's almost too late to react. And so that's just my perspective. But I want to, you
no,
work in HR and you're an expert in this space as well. So what's your perspective on engagement?
yeah.
You know, collectively, are we doing this the right way? Is surveys, should we do surveys still? Like, what do
Yeah,
you think?
yeah. No, it's a great question, and I think so. I had the privilege of working for the Gallup organization, and I was an engagement manager there, a senior consultant, and I got to work with people like Kurt Kaufman and Tom Rath, and Kurt used to tell me, Anil, there are things that should be measured, things that shouldn't be measured, but anytime that you get feedback, you need to take action on it. So I think the thing that you're pointing to is this, that there are a lot of surveys out there, and I think surveys are important because it is a great way to gather a large amount of feedback in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
I think what's missing, though, is that I think there's three things that are missing, right? I think one is that the feedback that is taken very rarely is their concrete action that is delivered based on that data. I think that the second thing is that we're not connecting employee engagement to driving business results. So what we're saying is we want engaged employees because we want engaged employees. So the formula, the conversation doesn't make sense, right? It's a circular argument. So what we need to be doing is saying we want engaged employees because we want lower error rates. We want to break into new markets. We want higher innovation. We want to tie it to something that is exactly a purpose.
Yeah.
Or even more, in addition to that, a business goal. So I want to increase customer engagement by 3%. And the way that I'm going to get there is by having 10% higher engagement in these couple of areas. So I think, so the first thing is we need to take action on feedback. The second thing is we need to make sure that we're connecting engagement to business goals. And I think the third thing is that we need to make sure that the leaders in our organization understand what to do with the data that they're getting. Yeah. So all too often, I have worked in organizations where they get this spreadsheet of information or they get this report.
Yeah.
And they look at the data and they say, okay, well, this looks low and this looks high, so maybe that's what I should be working on. But we don't arm managers well enough with information to give them the knowledge to say, look, this is what that information means, and this is what you should do with it. We do that with budgets. We say, like, hey, look, here's your budget. Yep. Here's what these actions mean and how this is going to impact that line item. We need to do the same thing with employee engagement. And I think with all kind of people measurements, and I could talk about employee engagement all day. I think it's a really important topic. And unfortunately, I think it's been commoditized a little too much.
Yeah.
Right? That we're like asking all these questions and people are filling out all these surveys and then nothing happens with it. And people say, well, why should I even fill this out anymore?
You know, that's, first of all, I love the perspective that you're bringing in this conversation. I do. I love it. There's a layer of work that's not done, and you hit it. And it's, you know, even in the world of change management, I'm speaking at the ACMP conference in Chicago, like next week or something. And, you know, I'll be talking about kind of how to map behavior to business results. And there's a layer of work to that, right? Like mapping people behavior to, you know, business results is not only conceptual. You can actually do it in you know, in real life if you force the conversation, do the due diligence. And I love that when you're talking about employee engagement, like that makes it relevant again, not just dishing out a survey, looking at numbers and you know, pontificating in a room trying to figure out what these results really mean, right? But if you have a goal for, you know, certain groups in the organization, there's a way to kind of ask the right questions in a proactive way.
Absolutely.
There's a way to do that. I love that.
Thank you. And I think, Brian, what you're pointing to is that, you know, there is this belief that there's hard stuff and soft stuff around business and around change and around how organizations are run. Yeah. And we emphasize the hard stuff a lot. And I think to some extent that is okay. Yeah. But the soft stuff, that stuff that we say is the soft stuff, that's what enables the hard stuff to happen. And so what we have, and I really appreciate what you're saying about connecting behaviors to business results, because that's, to me, one of the missing things in organizational change, right? We say, well, we want to get to this particular different way of being, or we want to introduce this new technology, or we want to reorganize the department. Yeah. But what we don't talk about is, so once we get there, what should we be seeing that will say we're successful? Well, one thing is, right, we're going to be more efficient. We're going to be more effective. We're going to make more money. The other thing is that we should be seeing people act in a different way that's going to get us there, because those results don't just magically happen.
No, you're
right?
absolutely right.
They happen because of a different way people act. So I think all the things we've talked about today, right? That whole notion of HR and driving impact through HR, change with HR, and really behavior around change is all pointing to the same thing, that the missing piece is we need to make sure that we help organizations understand that in order to get to that outcome, there are some ways that people are going to need to act to
Yes.
get there.
Yes. Yes. And there's the additional effort to really identify the goal that you're going after as well, not just doing the activities just to do the activities.
Yes.
So yeah, I love it. So Anil, thank you so much for providing your expertise in this conversation. Tell the community where they can find you.
Well, there's a couple of ways you can find me. You can go to my website, www.cube214.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm always there. Maybe I'm there a little too much. And I'm also pretty active on Twitter. My handle is @AnilBiz or Anil4Biz.
Yeah.
So those are the ways you can find me. I'd love to interact with you guys. I've had tons of fun on the community itself. I love the questions you ask every day. They really make me think. So thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Anil, thank you so much. This concludes.
Thank you.